From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 74. John O'Neill, our Director of Performance at Cressey Sports Performance Massachusetts, is going to be taking the lead today as a guest host. He's done a few episodes in the past, and they've been met with great reviews, so John's going to help out once again. His guest today is a guy named Ty Terrell. Ty is a super sharp guy when it comes to teaching movement. And what's cool about Ty is he's done it across multiple disciplines. He did a lot of work with baseball in the private sector, worked at Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training with our friends Bill Hartman and Mike Robertson. Did an awesome job there. And now he is an assistant strength and conditioning coach for the Atlanta Hawks, where he works with a few other good friend of mine from the past, Mike from the University of Connecticut, as well as John Dussel, who interned for us at our Massachusetts facility before those guys went to the NBA. So lots of connections behind the scene. And what's great is John has a really strong relationship with Ty, where he's going to be able to ask some great questions and really pull the best out of him in this interview. So we're in for a really good one today. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It's an all-in-one superfood supplement with 75 whole food sourced ingredients to support your body's nutritional needs across 5 critical areas: energy, immunity, gut health, hormonal support, and healthy aging. I'm an avid user of Athletic Greens myself, in spite of the fact that I tend to be a supplement minimalist. To me, this is a product that is much more like whole food nutritional insurance as opposed to a true supplement. The ingredients have been carefully selected at the highest quality, most natural source. You get essential vitamins and minerals, digestive enzymes, prebiotics, probiotics, and that's the zero compromise approach from the company. It's plant-based, sourced from whole foods at the highest quality, so you won't find harmful chemicals, artificial colors or flavors, preservatives, or added sugar. Really, it's perfect for folks who are gluten and dairy-free, paleo, keto, vegan-friendly, great for people who are intermittent fasting, all that fun stuff. Personally, I love it for obviously our athletes who don't get enough nutritional benefits from fruits and vegetables because they don't eat enough. So it's a way to kind of plug in holes in diets. But also, I really like it for our college and professional athletes who may have complex travel schedules where quality food options aren't always at hand. On a personal level, I'm a husband, father of 3, and an entrepreneur. We split our time between 2 states, and I'm also still an avid lifter. So life is inherently crazy, and it can be stressful, and sleep deprivation is definitely something that we encounter. So I rely on Athletic Greens for part of my immune support, and believe firmly that it's made a big difference in keeping me healthy in spite of how crazy our lifestyle is. They've got a great offer in place. If you head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey, they'll get you 20 free travel packets with your purchase. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY, and you can claim your special offer.
What's up, guys? This is John O'Neill, filling in for Eric Cressey. I'm the Director of Performance at CSP Massachusetts. This is my 3rd guest host podcast, and today I'm really excited to be bringing on a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Ty Terrell. A little backstory on my relationship with Ty, and one of the reasons I stay in touch with him, and one of the reasons that he was near the top of my list of people that I wanted to get on the podcast. So about 5-6 years ago at this point, probably about 5 years ago, I worked with a guy named Cody Benz, and Cody was a good friend of Ty's. And Cody would always tell me, like, hey, you got to meet Ty, you got to meet Ty, you got to meet Ty. You guys would get along really well. You have interests in common, relatively somewhat similar backgrounds. And so I had a chance to meet Ty at a course in 2017. And it was one of those things where I'm like, all right, well, I've been told for 2 years that I got to, talk to this guy. So I'm going to go up and introduce myself. So kind of hit it off with Ty, wound up asking him a couple questions. And I don't know if you remember this, but you actually said, just like, email me some questions. So I did. A lot of times when you meet someone at a course, you might get like a quick response email. You might just get a conversation. That's it. But I sent you an email. You sent me back like a longer one. It was like, hey, let's jump on a phone call. And I think ever since then, that was about 3 years, probably 3 years ago this month. We've stayed in relatively close contact, and you've been like a major resource for me in terms of helping me figure out newer cutting edge stuff, and any thoughts that I'm working through. You've always helped talk me through, whether it's like a 9 p.m. text or like this at 9 a.m. podcast that we're recording. So that just goes to show you what kind of guy Ty is, and hopefully you guys, as the audience, can get as much out of Ty in the next hour as I usually do. Ty, can you give us a little bit about your background other than the couple-minute spiel that I just gave on you?
Yeah. First, I mean, I appreciate this. This is, we're talking off air here, but I love doing this, and especially with you, John, because it's always a good conversation. And I think there's always, things to draw from and positive things to draw from that we both kind of leave and kind of add or to our thought process, or say, I didn't look at something like that, or I'm going to start, diving into this. So this is always beneficial. So I appreciate the invite. The background, a little bit of a non-traditional background. I am currently finishing school. I'm 38 years old, so I've been doing this for a little decade or so, maybe more. I don't give or take, and I don't have a formal education. I've just been incredibly fortunate and blessed to have just awesome mentors like Lee Taft, Bill Hartman. I've been influenced by people in the industry like Eric, but even a ton from just network of friends, and that list is long. I started in a garage, a two-car garage with Lee in my small hometown in Indiana. That lasted a couple years. I started to work for him. I then started working for myself, transitioned into a director position at a YMCA. Found out that was not for me, and so then I went to IFAST, Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training, with Mike Robertson and Bill Hartman. From there, I did a number of things. I worked speed camps around the country, and worked for a Division II, kind of a level two soccer team. It's formerly in the North American Soccer League. It was the Indy 11. And now I'm currently a performance coach at the Atlanta Hawks in basketball, but I still have a heart for baseball, and I love the things that baseball presents from a training side. And so that's why I kind of stay in touch with it. So that's my diary right there. That's me in a nutshell professionally.
Ty, so one of the things I'm curious about, I want to go back a little bit to near the beginning of that background. So I actually heard this on Lee Taft's podcast. I re-listened to that earlier this week just to get a feel for like good questions to ask you on this. And he mentioned how he basically, I think his quote was, he discovered you when you were coaching first grade basketball at a camp, and so that's a pretty long or different route from to go from coaching first grade basketball to coaching on the performance side in the NBA. And so I think a lot of coaches, younger coaches, whether it's strength and conditioning or sports, they look at it as like, all right, I can coach kids, but I can't really coach pro guys. I'm good with adults, but I'm not good with this age group. And I think we inherently look at these things as very different. But to me, you're one of those guys who you're a coach no matter who you're coaching, and I'm sure obviously you differ your approach a little bit, but what are the things that you do that are the same, whether the person in front of you is 8, 9, 10 years old, and very little experience, or they're 24 and making millions of dollars? What are the common or the consistent things that you do as a coach?
I mean, I love this question because coaching is coaching. So there's some underlying mechanisms that just are universal in coaching, and there's an infinite list, I'm sure, and I don't know that I have like definites, but I was coaching a basketball camp, and I happened to be with this 4, 5, 6-year-old group who, like, Lee's daughter happened to be in that group, and so that's how we got to talking. But I still have to, you have to kind of tap into the person in front of you, right? You have to be genuinely interested in the person in front of you, no matter where you're at. At the higher levels, like these guys, they may have a lot of strings pulling on them for various reasons. They may have people in their life that aren't there for genuinely, or they may, it doesn't. You don't know, but they need to know that, like, I am interested in them and their progress and what we have to do to maximize them. And that goes the same if I'm doing a boot camp and I have a 52-year-old man that needs to lose 20 pounds. Like, I am genuinely interested in helping you reach your goals. So from the stuff that's underlying, like maybe your motivations or your mental approach, like those things should be consistent across the board. Now, I have a pretty simplistic model in how I look at training for performance. So if it's like I need, first of all, our athletes, our people, to be able just to do basic human movements well, for a lot of reasons. But from a performance standpoint, I mean, if you can go through the phases of a squat or control the pelvis, in all three planes right there, like that's going to ultimately result in good output, in good movement, and so that's kind of my model to start with. And so if it's an 8-year-old, I have to relate it to an 8-year-old, and so we might do some fun things, or we might do just 3 or 4 at a time, and then go play, tag or dodgeball, or and then we come back and we do 3 more. So that may be how a class is structured there. If it's a higher level guy, we are trying to address something specifically because it's a limitation on the court or on the field or wherever. And so the approach to that movement, that squat, becomes a lot more focused, and it has more in the intent is a little bit different. We are trying to reduce knee pain. We are trying to improve a vertical jump, an athletic stance, a defensive stance, the ability to change directions. Like, whereas a younger athlete, we're trying to develop. It's a very long-term focus. It's a very fall in love with activity while we're learning to do things well. And so I would say the things that I'm working on and my underlying mechanisms, my motivations are similar across the board. How it's delivered to who's in front of me is going to differ depending on who's in front of me.
Yeah, that's an awesome answer. And so one thing that reminds me of is if this is probably, I don't know, a year or two ago. I think when you maybe your first year with the Hawks, but you told me that you were grateful that you went into pro sports when you did versus maybe going in 5, 6, 7 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about why you have that perspective? I think there's a big rush amongst coaches to get to the next level, get to the next level, get to the next level, whatever it is. Whether they're trying to get a college job or a pro job, it's the faster they get there, the better it is. You're somebody with, you can correct me, but 13, 14 years of experience, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, give or take. Yeah.
Yep. Why? Actually, to just steal your quote, like why would you say you're grateful that you it took so long for you to get to the level you're at right now?
There's a couple answers to that. The stakes are a little bit higher in pro sports. You are going to be judged by if this guy is able to perform like this or like that. You're going to be judged on if you can play a role in getting an athlete to return a few days sooner than he normally might. And so it's less safe to fail, I guess, at the higher levels is the best way to put that for me. It's you have to be ready, in my opinion. And so I had so much practical experience from so many different corners of our industry because of my path and because of the people that influenced me. I had this wide array, this large toolbox, to steal kind of an old term in our industry, of experiences, of skills. And so when I got to the NBA, I was able to say, oh, I know this situation. I've done this 100 times, or I've seen this before. And I'm able to identify like, oh, an athlete moves like this. I've seen that before. I know this is going to result in the inability to push off the right leg in a defensive stance as well, or so forth, and or if we're talking about pitching, I've seen the way that guy walks. I've seen the way this guy lunges. Like, I know his push off the mound is going to be limited, or his, when his stride foot hits, his hips are going to kick out and he's not going to be able to direct everything vertically then downhill. So things like that. So I just had this massive kind of, we talk, like, if you were doing research, you would want a large sample size to get a more accurate outcome in the research. Well, because I coached in the private sector and got a ton of reps before I actually entered pro sports, I had a large, quote unquote, sample size of experiences, and I had just seen a lot of things. Now, 10, 12, 13 years, like that's a good amount of experience, but there are guys that are doing this, have been doing it for 20 and 30 years, and they have even more. So they have a better sample size than I do. But I was able to jump in right away. And my number one rule for a coach, and it doesn't matter what you're coaching, whether it's, soccer, kids soccer, or high school basketball, or, collegiate, SEC baseball or whatever, like, you need to first be useful. And if you don't know how to coach things and you don't know how to, modify, and you don't even have to use like crazy science and programming. You just need to be able to coach and modify and relate to that person in front of you. That's how you be useful first. So I talk to a lot of young coaches, and they're like, and they don't have a lot of experience, or maybe they're lacking here, or they're interested, their ambitions are maybe misplaced. Um, I tell them all the time, you got to be useful. Like, I wouldn't hire you unless you were useful, because I don't want to have to do this job and do another job and trying to develop you. Now, if you're an intern or something like that, it's different. You're there to be developed. You're there to learn. That's a safe place to fail. But if you're at a higher level and you're employed, I don't think that's a safe place to fail. So you need to be ready. Whereas, like in the private sector, if I'm working with a group of 10-year-olds, like, as long as I'm not putting them in harm's way, I can do some, try some things out and not maybe get incredible results, but like there's an ability or a window to kind of explore stuff when you're in the private sector working with younger athletes. So that's why I'm grateful, because I had this large sample size of experience. I was able to develop a wider skill set, a better thought process before I got to, the professional sports. And it has allowed me to make fewer mistakes. And I still make some, but it has allowed me to make fewer mistakes and be more effective for these guys, where days matter, weeks matter. Perception of what they can and cannot do matters. So you sometimes you're trying to change perception because that may mean a next contract. So there's a lot on the line for those guys at that level.
I think one of the messages in there too that you kind of touched upon when you went through your background, but indirectly, not all experience is created equal. And so I'll use the research study example that you used, but if you have a large sample size and the large sample size, like, it just isn't quality, then
Right.
it doesn't really matter. But obviously with your background, and I know how progressive you are in terms of trying to learn new things and learn from other people, and just following Lee and Bill, who you worked for or following those guys from afar, you know that those guys are constantly improving, and someone like yourself who worked with them for years is also most likely constantly improving. And so can you talk a little bit about, let's say when you, and you could give this answer, the 10 years ago answer versus the now answer, when you learn new stuff, what is the process in your head that you go through to start incorporating that with your athletes?
So this is actually a great question, and I think the way you framed, I don't know if, I think it's pretty wise the way you framed that, because as like 5 years ago, my ability to take in information and kind of know where it fits in the grand scheme of things and training or whatever, and how I'm going to implement it, was worse than it is now. And that's just experience, right? That's just, and the more I learn, the more I understand things. And so the more I understand things, the more, I can see if this information, how it's going to fit and things like that, or if it's even information that's worthy of taking in, or, or you can see the pitfalls or the flaws in that. So, I have this kind of, we all have this like evolving thought process, but my model really hasn't, I don't want to say it hasn't changed, because I'm always wanting to make it better, but I pretty much stick to like basics. I pretty much stick to fundamentals. I pretty much, hey, these are, this is science right here, and this is what I know, is happening. I stick to the definites. If we were talking physics, you would talk first principles. These are things that are absolutely, we known. And so when I take in new information, it has to kind of jive with that, with my knowns. If it doesn't, a red flag goes up, and I have to look into this a little bit more to see if this information is valid or not. But it all kind of comes back to having really good, solid, like, fundamentals in your knowledge base. And that's why it's important, I think, to get around good mentors and get around good peers in our industry that can say, that's, I call BS on this or this concept, or I don't think what you say is happening is actually happening. And they challenge you in a good way, and you'll be able, you look into it, you can have a conversation, you study a little bit more, and you say, oh, no, you're right. Like, this is actually what's happening. And now my fundamentals change a little bit. They improve. They got a little bit better. So now my filter for incoming information improves. And so that's kind of, things have to jive with my fundamentals that I know is happening. And so I have a model for how the body moves, right? And if someone tells me this is what's happening in the body when I throw a baseball and it doesn't jive with my model, then I have to, peel back the layers and take a deeper look into what's being said and what's in my model. So that's kind of the process. It happens. It didn't happen intentionally in the beginning, but now that it's, I've just kind of developed this train of thought or this way of going about things. It happens just kind of inherent, like innately now, and so which is, again, speaks to having experience and and spending time going through things and exploring and being willing to fail and so forth. But yeah, that's kind of my thought process. It's a little vague, not very specific, but just things have to jive with what you know to be true, and if they don't, then you have to review what you know to be true and the incoming information. I think a lot of times we get stuck on our fundamentals and we don't check on that side of things. We just go at the incoming information when maybe we should be checking both to ensure that everything is good. Like if I have a son and he hits somebody else's son, like you can't, you gotta, address both kids here. You can't just say, well, it's all his fault.
That's a really good analogy that we have to steal for all different contexts.
Yeah, I know.
You talk a little bit, or you talked a lot about kind of having this model in your head of what movement should look like, whether it's basketball, baseball. It doesn't really matter if the person's an athlete or not. It's just human movement. Can you give us kind of a brief overview of what that model is in your head?
Yeah, and it's just simple. And I got this from Lee a long time ago, but Lee would say you have to load to explode. I just simply say we're going to load and unload. Like Bill Hartman is going to go load and propulsive. So whatever term you want to say on that, I just keep it simple and say load and unload. And so there are things that occur when you load, right? You turn into a hip. The joints flex. I've got ankle dorsiflexion, knee flexion, hip flexion. Yeah, and again, you're rotating into a hip. So the trunk is rotating over that hip. So if I'm loading a right hip, I'm going to right trunk rotate. And so that's my model. It's real simple here. So if I see someone go into a cut, or if I see someone like a pitcher, their stride foot hits and they can't load that front leg, they can't turn into that front leg, then my red flag goes up. Okay, well, what's happening? What are they doing, and why can't they do that? For the explode, now we're talking about, or the unload, now we're talking about things like, these are really things that we train, or we like to train our industry, right? The concentric outputs of it, extension based, movements, and rotating away from the pushing leg. So if it's, if I'm pushing downhill, or I'm unloading my leg that's on the rubber, I'm going to push away from that spot, rotate my trunk away from that spot, and the same goes if I'm coming out of a cut, right? If I'm pushing left leg out of a cut, I'm pushing away from that spot, rotating away from that spot with my trunk, and the joints get extended. Versus if you're loading, the joints they kind of fold up. So I look at to kind of bridge off of that, so that's why, like, I'm not making anything up here when I talk about the squat, but the way I see the squat is so important to my model because it demonstrates the ability to load and unload completely, right? So if I call, we don't have phone booths anymore, and occasionally I'll ask a guy, do you know what a phone booth is? And I'm only 38, but I'm starting to date myself here because a lot of these young, like, they don't know, they've never seen a phone booth. But if you can squat in a phone booth, meaning, you don't pitch forward too far, your head and shoulders aren't going too far to hit the glass in front of you. You're not kicking your butt out too far behind you. You're just kind of sitting straight down in this box. That means ankles, knees, hips can all bend like they're supposed to. That means your core, the trunk, the midsection right there, is stabilizing all parts that connect to it like it's supposed to. And, things are, we would call that proximal control, but things are in the position that we would ideally have them be in, or else I wouldn't be able to sit all the way down, and then I wouldn't be able to have an effective stand up. Some people call that, there are some aspects of this called, the stretch shortening cycle, and that's been, obviously an old term that's been around for a while. But there are just phases that you have to go through when you go load to unload, you have to, eccentrically orient the body to load. That's kind of expanding. Like if I'm going to load my right hip, I'm going to sink back into my right hip. You'll feel the back of my right hip kind of expand or eccentrically orient. If I need to stand up or explode, that's concentric. That's output. That's extension. And so a squat demonstrates the ability to do both of those actions. And that's why it's so important to me. So that's kind of like my motto when I think about load and unload. You have to be able to access certain joint positions. You have to be able to, do it at a certain speed or at certain forces. And then to unload, you have to be able to, again, reach certain joint positions, extension, etc., and do it at certain speeds and with certain forces if you want to be successful.
That reminds me a lot. We had this conversation, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, but just talking about evals and assessments and what the process is for that. And you talked a lot about having this backwards approach, and other people in the field talk about it too. I just think that you describe it really well. Of if you're working with a pitcher, let's say, maybe part of your eval is watching the kid pitch or watching video on the kid pitch and then backtracking. Whereas that a lot of times you're going to see a lot more, or it's going to clue you into what the kid needs to work on. Can you talk about kind of let's say you're watching a right-handed pitcher, and we can break down righties and lefties. But let's say you're watching a right-handed pitcher. What are the kind of the big things that you're looking for throughout the delivery?
Yeah, and so to me, again, I don't know if I'm just too simplistic or whatever, and I know there's difference, but like it doesn't matter if they're right or left to me because I'm
Sure.
looking, because kind of I talked about, you asked me a question earlier about coaching, youth versus high level athletes. Like there's underlying mechanisms, right? And to me, the way the body moves and the way it's designed to move is the underlying mechanism in any context, right? So whether it's I'm hitting, I'm cutting, I'm jumping, I'm throwing left or right-handed, there's still the body's still designed to move a certain way. So that's consistent. That's the constant across all movements. The movement itself is the context in which the way our body moves is applied. So I just kind of strip it down to the simplest place I can go. And so if I'm breaking down a right-handed pitcher, I just, there are certain phases of that, right? Like I want to know that they can first stand on their right leg, when they come into the left hip flexion, they bring their left leg up off the ground. I want to know that they can stand on their right leg. So I'm looking at, is the right hip kicking out? Are they leaning their shoulders back? Are they moving in any direction that takes them away from this nice vertical, I'm standing on my right leg, kind of like the same thing I talked about squatting in a phone booth. You should kind of be in this box. If you were looking at him, let's say he's, you're standing at first base and you were looking at the back, the numbers on the back of the jersey for a right-handed thrower, you should be able to see, straight line, kind of this guy fit into a box. If he's not, we need to examine that position. The great thing about the way, at least I think it's great, the way I look at some of this movement is that I don't necessarily have to understand. I want to, and I work towards this, but I don't necessarily have to understand all this complex stuff. I just need to know that pitcher needs to be able to stand on his leg like that. And so now your exercise, your corrective exercise or your programming, the exercises you're choosing, it becomes pretty simple. You try to recreate that position or that moment in an exercise, and you just provide the more or less support based on what the athlete can do. So let's say it's that leg lift, and he doesn't do it well. So I may just simply have him put one arm against the wall, stand with his right leg straight, and then do some leg lifts, bring his left knee up. If he can hold that at the top and maybe take a couple breaths and spend some time there, now I'm going to give him less support, and then move it more towards something dynamic, which is what he's going to do on the mound. So I kind of took it off course there, but that's how I just look at that moment, and then the mind immediately goes to, well, this is simple. I just design an exercise or create an exercise that emulates that moment. The second thing is, can they push? So if I'm a right-handed pitcher, how far? I know stride length is an indicator of throwing performance, and so that athlete's ability or that pitcher's ability or whoever it is, a shortstop or a pitcher, the ability to push off the mound is going to tell me some things. So if I push off the rubber and I start to go, if I'm a right-handed pitcher and I start to kind of move towards third base with my body, that's a problem, because now I've got directions going away from, or the direction of my body is not going towards the plate. And so now I'm going to have a loss of velocity because I have to use energy, to get it back on track. And so, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Well, that's, let's say I have a finite amount of energy I can put into a throw. And if I go on a straight line, I can put all my energy into that straight line. But if I go right, then left, then straight, I've got energy going right, energy going left, and energy to get me going straight. That's just, I have that. Now you have less energy into your, into the ball. And so if he can't push off for distance, or then I'm looking at, how much hip abduction does he have? If he can't push off in a straight line, I'm looking at where is his center of gravity. So people who kind of have a center of gravity, like if you just looked at somebody from the side and if they're kind of leaned forward ahead of like where their ankle would be, if you just drew a straight line up and they're ahead of that line, they have a forward center of gravity. So when I go to stand on my right leg and go into my leg lift, my center of gravity, if it's forward, is going to take me towards third base or the third base line. So you may see me push that towards that way. So now we have to worry about address center of gravity, which could just be like good core work, good anterior core work, exercises that force you to reach, like one arm cable presses or front planks or things like that. And then you kind of, progress into more dynamic exercises. Also, I just may put 2 cones out in front of them and say, stay inside these 2 cones, and just create the path for the pitcher. So you, again, just kind of, this can be a long talking point here, but you've got, can you stand on your right leg? Can you push off your right leg in a straight line? Now we've got the stride foot hitting. So this is actually one of my favorite points. And there's old research that shows that the ability to transfer your horizontal forces, pushing off the mound, into your vertical forces, your stride foot hits and transfer those forces up into the body, into the ball, that's a strong indicator of throwing performance. So now you have to say, okay, I have a left, if I'm a right-handed pitcher, I have a left stride foot that's going to hit the ground. It has to decelerate or stop my forward momentum, and it has to transfer that vertically. Well, now we're talking, that's basically just like a forward lunge. And so if you've got an athlete that's doing lunges or split squats or whatever, single leg movement like that, and let's say it's just a stationary lunge, and I go down and I start to stand up, and you see that front leg, that loaded working leg, if you see that knee kind of kick back a little bit, meaning like the shin either gets vertical or behind the heel, then that shows me an athlete that can't handle those forces. He can't push through his quad. He can't stabilize through his core and his hips so that knee can stay exactly where it is and he can push vertically. I think it's a big deal because I think a lot of young pitchers, a lot of young athletes will show you that fault right there. So you can kind of see that this stuff is universal. And that's part of the reason why I'm giving these kind of these examples like that you might see in the weight room or whatever, but to show that, movement is movement, and you can assess someone's pitching or the ability to throw or swing in the weight room as much as you can on the mound. So yeah, stride foot hits, the ability to decelerate, and transfer that energy up. If he cannot trunk rotate, you're not going to have a lot of separation. So you're going to see a very vertical, extended, arched back upper body if they can't separate. So that tells you need to work on trunk rotation. As a right-handed throw comes through, if you see left side bending, so if they side bend or crunch down to the left, kind of towards first base, that tells me someone who can't rotate left into that front side of their body, into that front left hip. And so now you need to work on that. And if they do that, if they side bend, it's going to elevate their right arm, and it's not going to. So now I've got direction issues again, like I gave in the push off example. Now I don't have all my energy going towards, or all my momentum going towards the plate. I'm side bending left towards first base. It raises my right arm up in the air, and now I'm still trying to get downhill towards the plate. So it's just like a really inefficient, ineffective way to use all the energy that you've developed in that delivery. So if I can't finish towards the plate, now I've got can I rotate left? Can I rotate into that front hip? And can I flex my trunk? So those are the training qualities that you would attack. And then that would be my assessment. And if you wanted to go onto the table and measure joint stuff to kind of confirm that, you can absolutely do that.
Ty, that was awesome. I was really happy just to not say anything that was probably 12 plus minutes. But I figured that would be a really detailed answer, and you made it really easy to picture each step. Or I hope for the listeners as well. But there's so many layers within that. One, like the whole concept of starting with the skill, right, and looking at the skill first as the eval, which I kind of led off with in the question, but then actually breaking down each. And people want to look at it as classic pitching mechanics, having this 5-step approach or whatever it is. But this is really any kind of movement in sports. So if you know what the movement is supposed to look like, you can start to break down the individual moments. But then from there, simplifying the strategies of how you're going to attack the moment. So like the first thing you're going to look at is can you coach it on the mound? Like, can a good pitching coach it on the mound?
Yes.
And then if they can't, like a lot of the stuff you were talking about of starting more static and eventually getting dynamic, starting with something that is exactly or supported, and then going unsupported, something that's exactly like the moment they struggle with, and then being able to identify like what are the critical moments in the delivery that are the things that you need to attack, and also too part of that is. You mentioned like your first one of being able to like balance on that back leg and then load into it. Like if you can't do that correctly, your chances of basically recovering the path and then doing one of those later steps correctly is also going to be off. So
definitely.
And so it is going to be somewhat of a linear process of what you're going to correct. Unless there's one that's just so egregious that you need to attack it first from a health perspective. But
right.
So
one point to that, John, I'd add to that is just I got some really good advice. Really 2 points, and it was probably one of the first things that I learned from Lee, and I still use it today, and it's literally some of the most powerful advice, but it's also some of the simplest. He would always tell me, "What do you want it to look like?" So if you're trying to, whether you're assessing a throw or a swing or a lunge or whatever you're assessing, like what do you want it to look like? And so now it puts the onus on you to develop a model of, hey, what should this look like? And that could be you going and watching video or asking someone that's well honed, in that area, to help you develop a model of what it should look like. But then that's what your exercises, that's what drives your exercise selection. So if I need, like you said, like we'll use that right leg balance example, and the guy, the pitcher can't do it, I need to I need to give him an exercise that is more or less supported until it looks like what I want it to look like or what it needs to look like. And so what you're doing is the second part of the advice is you're just meeting the athlete where they're at. You give them as much support as they need to make the exercise look like what you want it to look like. And it's that simple. So it doesn't matter how you want to support it. I mean, we've got, you can go on social media or the internet and find all these ways to do all these exercises. Pick one or make your own up. It doesn't matter. But you make it look how you want it to look, and you give them as much or little support as you need to make it look that way. Those are my 2 rules when I'm trying to coach a sports skill or any exercise, really, whether it's a squat, a lunge, or push up or whatever. So that's those are my coaching rules.
Can you talk about like within that? Because I know, this isn't to pick on PRI or any school of thought, but I know you're very well versed in that stuff from your time at IFAST.
Yep.
And so let's just say, and to use a more general sense, let's say like lower level activities, so things that aren't fast, aren't heavy, or don't become dynamic. can you talk about like a point maybe in your career where you would have leaned that way and now going back to older stuff that you've used in terms of simplifying stuff?
Oh yeah, for sure. And my first couple years at IFAST I'm not a great learner, and so I don't read real like super well. But I can take in information if it's active. So like if I'm seeing it being done or I'm doing it myself or something like that, I can take information in like that. So one of the blessings of going to IFAST is it's a very smart facility, and not that they don't make you do anything, but there's a certain level that they operate at intellectually, and so that's exactly what I wanted and needed because that was I had gotten a ton of practical stuff from Lee, and I needed more science. I needed to get to build that side of me as a coach. And so I went there and I dove headfirst into things like PRI and stuff like that. And so for the first couple of years, I'm leaning very heavily on that. One, because I'm learning it, and so I want to use it. But two, as you're learning something in the beginning, you get super excited about it, right? And you think this is the best thing, and it's not until over time that you gain perspective on when and where and why to use these tools that you're learning. So my first 2 years at IFAST, I did a ton of low level, what you might call intrinsic. So you're internalizing, the exercise. Like, do you feel this here? Do you feel this there? That would be internalizing. That slows things down because it forces you to, kind of look inward and process, what you're feeling and things like that. Sports is not intrinsic. It is something that it's reactive, and so I didn't make the connection at that point in time. But a lot of our athletes or people, while yes, they were moving a little bit better, when it came to perform at high speeds or just anything dynamically, the transfer from laying on the floor or being supported didn't come fully all the time. And on top of that, while maybe they were able to access this hip motion or get more trunk rotation in a low level situation, the high level situation, the dynamic situation, the explosive situation was too much for the body. It exceeded the body's threshold to maintain that motion, and so I wasn't getting a performance and like boost from that. And at the same time, when you're spending so much time doing low level stuff, you're not enhancing physiology, you're not enhancing output. So I'm not building force, I'm not building power, not like in a way that would impact, performance in the game. So after 2 years, I got a little frustrated because I wanted to have a positive impact with the people I was working with. While they felt better, they moved a little bit better in more controlled situations, more controlled movements. And what I mean by that is, maybe they could do a lunge better, but it didn't transfer to their sprinting technique. So I kind of had to put PRI in perspective at that point in time and say, okay, I need this, I like this, or at least the concept of corrective, like low level stuff. But let's use it the amount that I need to use it, which was far less than I was using it. And let's put more emphasis on coaching dynamic stuff, finding strategies, exercises, progressions of exercises that would allow me to help develop an athlete dynamically. That way, now I'm addressing, any type of like local joint movement or whatever pain with the low level stuff. I've got a system for progressively moving athletes through dynamic skills. And so now I'm getting to a point to where I can train performance, I can train output, power, and all those things. And technically, they're doing things better because they're learning to do them dynamically. And so I'm raising the body's threshold, or the athlete is raising the body's threshold of the ability to hold on to this motion or access this joint range of motion during dynamic stuff. And so that's kind of where I am now. And that kind of started in the last 2 or 3 years I was at IFAST. I was at IFAST for about 5 years. And results were a lot better. I can just say that, which they always are. Like the pendulum swings all the way to the left and then all the way to the right. And the results are usually best when it settles somewhere in the middle. And so that's when perspective occurs. And so I was able to just through, you can call it failure, you can call it experience or whatever, but I was able to give perspective to the tools that I was using. And that's not to pick on low level stuff or whatever. I mean, the same can be said for high level stuff. Like, what if a guy or an athlete or girl, has knee pain, and every time you come back to high level stuff, that knee pain flares up? Well, maybe you need to give priority to low level stuff for a little bit and give less priority to the high level stuff. So you just shift your focus based on, what the athlete's body is telling you.
I want to go back to so when we were talking to pitching mechanic related stuff, and you could probably speak to this as well on the NBA side, and so it doesn't have to be specifically baseball, but I don't want to give the impression to the listeners that we're trying to jam everybody into the exact same mechanics.
True.
Because if you watch any, doesn't matter what level baseball game actually, but specifically high level baseball, you rarely see two pitchers that do the exact same thing.
Right.
So, and some of it is outside of the boxes that we talked about, but they're extremely high level performers. So how do you, both theoretically on the baseball side, but also potentially a little bit on the NBA side, how do you weigh someone who's a high level performer at their sport, but they do things that don't really quite fit your model, but it helps them perform, versus that long term health wise that might not be in the best interest of the athlete?
Yeah, so this is the art of things, and this involves the relationship with the athlete, because if I want to, there are some pitchers out there, and there are a couple that immediately come to my mind, and I don't want to name names, but like, where you're like, man, I don't like the way he does that, or that could lead to an elbow, or that's why he's so wild sometimes. But this is the way this pitcher's done it. He's in the major league, so he's immediately part of the elite. And let's say he's doing really well. So now he's in the elite of the elite. And you're going to go to this athlete and you're going to say, you need to change. And the immediate human reaction to that is, I'm one of the best, 20 best pitchers in the world. Like, what do you mean I need to change? And I probably would have the same reaction too. So that's why the relationship part matters. So while, yes, I have a model and there are these kind of buckets of mechanics that that you would like guys to fall into at certain positions of their throw or their swing, also understand that you can deviate from that bucket a little bit and still be okay. Like, if the orthopedic norm for hip motion is 40 degrees, so that's how much the hip should move in this direction. I'm just using an arbitrary term. It can be IR or ER, but let's say it's internal rotation of the hip, and let's say the norm is 40 or 45 degrees. Maybe for an explosive athlete, having 25 degrees is perfect. And so maybe that's a sweet spot that still allows him to be explosive, but not develop a ton of wear and tear and it breaks down, or not be so limited that this athlete can't access this position of his delivery or swing or cut. So that's kind of the art of things, and that you are allowed to deviate from that. But it takes time to know the athlete, because let's say this pitcher deviates from that spot. Let's say it's he didn't push off straight towards home plate, and he kind of goes towards third. And that means he has to kind of side bend back towards first base to get on a straight line. And let's say that it puts stress somewhere in the chain more than others, right? And so you have to now talk to the pitcher. Do you have a symptom? Do you feel like you can be accurate with this? You can even look at some of the technologies that's used. Like, what's the spin rate on this? Is it where it's supposed to be? You can use some of that information to have a conversation with the athlete and say, I would like to improve this. Or you can say, I don't want to take all of this away from you, so we're going to just, maybe improve this shoulder motion a little bit, or this hip motion a little bit. And we're going to keep working on these mechanics right here, that we just kind of move him back to that bucket, a little bit closer to that bucket, but maybe not all the way back. The other way to approach this is, let's say it's a starting pitcher. Maybe they pitch how they pitch, because motor programs can be tough to reteach, especially if a guy's been doing it for a long time. So if this movement pattern or this movement habit is how I've done it forever, and I'm hell bent on staying with it, maybe days 1 through 5 of his off day is where you make the impact. Maybe you're getting him joint motion back right away. Maybe you're, training him on the table and in the weight room in a way that, can kind of bring him back closer to that bucket so he's not, moving every day of his life away, so far away from that bucket that he's continuing to add more wear and tear on his body. Honestly, the last example is a lot of the most common ones. In my sport of basketball, I think it's a little bit easier than in baseball. A guy, is pretty clear, like the joint, the mechanics that a guy moves with, if they tend to show themselves on the court in a negative way or positive way. So like if I can't sit, low through my hips and, bend at my ankles and my knees, and I try to guard you in an athletic stance, I have to lean forward with my trunk. So now I'm leaning towards the guy I'm guarding. Now that makes it easier for him to go by me. So my weight is forward towards the guy I'm guarding, but I'm going to have to retreat and stay in front of him, which means I'm going to have to shift my weight backwards now to get in front of him. So I won't do that very well. There's a consequence for that. You either don't play, you just continuously get beat, and so we have to address that. So in my sport, it's a little bit different. I think the outcome is more clear and warrants addressing. I think in baseball, some of these guys are so stinking talented, and they have found their bodies are so smart, they have found ways to work around their movement flaws that in that motor pattern or program is so ingrained in their head because it's been refined over and over again. They're kind of like their superpower is kind of compensating, the ability to compensate that maybe you just have to work with them on days 1 through 5. And the truth is, there's no right answer. Like the right answer, this is why, again, I come back to the relationship part. You have to talk to that pitcher and you have to get on the same page. And you better have objective and subjective information to speak on with that pitcher or that hitter or whoever you're trying to work with. You can't just say, it can't just be your opinion. And it has to involve the athlete and you in that conversation. And then you have to kind of figure out the strategy from there. Are we just going to be trying to, tend to you on your off days in between starts? Or are we going to try to give you a little bit more motion so we can do this a little bit better? Or are we going to try to change the whole thing? Obviously, each one of those takes a certain amount of time. Changing the whole thing takes a long time. Changing it a little bit takes a little bit of time. And then just tending to him during the off days takes no time. You just do it. That's kind of the nuance and the art of coaching, and it has to involve the athlete. It has to be relational.
Ty, I could spend all morning asking questions, listening to, but I do want to shift gears a little bit, just to touch on something. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 minutes left.
Okay.
But so I know you're very well versed in velocity-based training or VBT, and you have a book on it. I've seen you present on it. So you're one of the guys in the field that people should go to learn about VBT. Within that question, so you're in pro sports right now. Obviously, analytics and data has become so much more a part of the professional game in every sport over the last probably 5 years or so. Can you talk a little bit about like any advice you would have for younger coaches as to what they should learn on the sports science side before they try to get into pro sports?
Yeah, and so my answer to this is going to be a little bit, you can label it old school, because tech is the advancements in our technologies that we can use in sports is outpacing our knowledge of the science behind the technology. And so what I mean by that is you can look at GPS data, or you can, do a load velocity profile, or use velocity-based training, or you can look at force time curves on a force plate. And if you don't understand the science behind all that stuff, you're just looking at numbers. And so a lot of this stuff in sports science is not, and I ask, like I've got a couple guys that I go to that help me, and rarely do I get a definitive answer. I mean rarely. And I try to pin them down for a definitive answer. So, for example, like if I'm doing a force plate jump. And if you don't know what a force time curve, it's basically just, how much force you're putting into the force plate raises the curve, or the more force, the higher the curve, the less force, the lower the curve, and then it's throughout the time of you jumping on the force plate. So there's kind of a model. Of these. There's a couple different ways, or a couple different models of force time curves that you see. And so I'm always asking this friend who's a PhD in this stuff, what about this and what about that? And he's like, well, it depends. And you get frustrated because you're looking for definitive answers so that you can further your understanding. But the truth is, you have to be able to dissect this technology, or the data that this technology is giving you. You have to understand that if I'm looking at spin rate on a throw, is that good or bad in this situation? Because, like, for example, I'll tell you, like, so if I'm trying to throw a sinker in baseball and I have a lot of backspin on my ball, so if we're just looking, hey, spin rate is great on that, but backward spin keeps the ball in the air. It creates what they call a lift force. And so your sinker may not sink as much as you want to if you have a lot of lift force. So now that ball, maybe that ball sits in the strike zone a little bit more, and then you're probably turning your head and looking at the outfield wall, and once that guy hits that. And so so you have to understand the context of and the variables behind the science behind this technology. So I don't know if that's a welcomed answer, but that's just the truth and reality. I mean, we look at our GPS data all the time, and if I don't understand if I don't understand what the demands of the game and the flow of the game, and then the relationship of acceleration and power and all these things and distance and all that stuff, if I don't understand that stuff, I can't interpret that GPS data in a way that's going to be helpful. I'm just looking at numbers at that point in time. And so that's what I recommend. And that takes time. I mean, it's not a fun answer. And to be honest with you, if you're, and I'm not trying to pick on young coaches, because some of these young coaches coming out, they have so much access to tremendous information. They're starting in a place that I could never dream about, that I started at. I'm just kind of getting to that place now where they're starting. But what they don't have is experience, which means they don't have context with this data. So I would understand the science behind it in a major way. And that doesn't mean you learn the science, then use the technology. Use the technology to help teach you the science. I used a gym aware for VBT. I learned so much about physiology and physics by messing around with the gym aware for 3 years, and then looking at the data, and then reevaluating athletes and seeing how this training stimulus impacted their force time curves or their force velocity curves, and the ability to produce force quickly. Did heavy lifting take away from that? Did it add to it, etc.? Or did I included more jumps, more unloaded jumps? Did that change the rate at which they can produce force, or how powerful they can be? So use the technology to learn the science, but you better learn the science if you really, really want to be effective with that technology. And the best people that I know at using this technology understand the science. The ones that don't are just giving me numbers that now I have to interpret. And that's just the honest truth.
And that makes a ton of sense. And it's actually, I know you said it was, or within that, you said it was like not welcoming to hear some version of that. But in reality, I mean, it actually is, I think it's very welcoming to someone like me, or someone who's in the private sector and maybe doesn't have a ton of technology, because there is an inherent sense of when someone's using something that you're not, that you're behind. But if you can, keep getting better at your own craft, whatever you have access to, when you do go to use the technology, it's only going to be easier.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, like if you understand the science, like you may not even need the technology. And listen, we've had great training for a long time without the technology. You kind of use your coaching eye. You understand, man, we've been lifting. I'm not picking on lifting heavy, but let's just say we've been chasing a one rep max for, 4 months now, or whatever. I don't, pick a number, pick a length. But you know what? You seem to be slower when you sprint. Well, there's a connection there, and there are adaptations that heavy lifting does to the body that can take away from speed stuff. And, and there's, pick any two kind of training stimuli that you want, but like some training stimuluses oppose other qualities. And so you have to find a balance. And I think if you are with an athlete for enough time, you get to see how their body responds to different training stimuli. You can learn about the science of adaptation and physiology and physics just by observing your athletes, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen quick. It happens slowly, unfortunately. But like if I've got a freshman in high school starting with me, and I know they're probably going to be training with me through high school, that's 4 years of observation that you get to do with that athlete, and apply your training system to them and see what happens, and make note.
Ty, I think this is probably the last question here, unless you
Yep.
say something that prompts another one. But so I know, I can't remember if you mentioned this in your background, but I know, you didn't go to school for this stuff or have like a 4-year exercise science degree. And I think there are a lot of, myself included, a lot of young coaches in the field that, the ease of access into the field is easier than ever now. And you see people, without certain letters behind their name that are able to climb in the field a lot faster than they maybe would have been 10 years ago.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about any advice that you would give to younger coaches that are maybe don't have a background in this stuff, about how you went about learning the science and what resources that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I mean, it started with the environment that I was in. To be honest with you, it started with I had access to really smart people that could answer my questions and give good or great guidance. And so that the environment that you put yourself in matters a ton. And there's a lot of coaches that are, in a small town or a big town, wherever you are, that don't have a network of friends in the industry that maybe operate at a level that they want to be at or whatever. And so I would seek out another network. That's one that's going to help push you along. I know this is sometimes an extreme situation, but I have seen professionals in industry stop what they're doing, stop their career, and go do an internship at 27, 28, 29 years old. And they're better off for it when they come out of that. And it takes them down a whole new exciting path. You can read textbooks. I had jumped in. I still read a lot of textbooks, but I also sought out people who could answer the questions of, I know this is what this says in the textbook, but what does this look like in the weight room, on the court, on the field? And so that's the biggest thing. Having people around you that can help you transfer or bridge the gap between the textbook and actual practical application or live performance. That's my biggest advice, because it goes back to something I said earlier about you have to be useful. If you can just make a post or whatever, on social media, whatever, about science, that's great. But if you can't apply it, understand how it's impacting the athlete in front of you, and understand like what your training stimuli that you're giving to this athlete is going to result in 4 weeks from now or whatever. I know we can't be exact all the time, but you can, 1 + 1 = 2. We can be in the ballpark a little bit. If I apply stimulus A for X amount of weeks, I should expect outcome X, and so getting in situations and having people around you that can help bridge the gap between the science, the text, and what's happening on the court is that's my best advice, because that's how you're going to become the most useful as a coach, because now you're understanding the sport demands and the science and the cause and effect of what you're doing with the athlete, and that is huge.
Ty, this was awesome. I think I was only able to ask maybe 6, 7 questions, which is great, because the answers were really really detailed on all of them, and hopefully provoke more questions from the listeners to go look things up or reach out to people, like you were saying. Where can
John, I
want
to add one thing to that.
Yeah.
Like I'll graduate. School for me has always been a problem, so I'll end up graduating here soon, and I'm glad I went back and did school because it formalized, because that formal education actually filled in some gaps for my own learning. I think that plays a huge role in a coach's education, is that formal education. But it's not done there, I guess. So if I were to summarize that last question you had, or add to that last question, the formal education matters, and I have found that out. Like I didn't think it did in the beginning. I could teach myself and so on, but I found out that it did matter. So I had to, I've gone back and I'll graduate this year. So, but it was just the beginning. Like it's just a platform that I build more knowledge on. So that's kind of, I guess I wanted to, because I think it's an important note to say is that, while there's a ton of learning that can occur in the industry, like a formal education still matters.
Cool. That's awesome there. So last thing here, Ty, where can, I know you're not a big social media guy, but where can listeners find out more about you or get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of people help me and give me access without really anything in return. So I try to return the favor. And so, my email is just TYLTERRELL @gmail.com. We all are busy. So if you, email me and, give me a couple days to get it back, I'm open to helping anyone I can. And just kind of paying it forward for all the people that have helped me. So that's probably the best way. I do have an Instagram account, but I haven't posted anything in I don't even know, a couple of years or whatever. And so it's probably not worth going to. But so yeah, just the email is just the best.
Awesome. Well, Ty, thanks for your time today. And, maybe hopefully the listeners like it enough where we can get you on a second time.
Beautiful. I appreciate it, John.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.